What is up, guys? We are back again with another episode. Again, we're still without Gary, even though he's actually home. He's back from his holidays. He's just chilling out. He's like, oh, I'll take an extra day of holidays. No, he's actually catching up on some work that he has been off for the last 2 weeks. So there's a lot of work to do. However, Nicola is here to join us. But Nicola, you seem to be able to, have a nice little holiday, get straight back to work. No bother. It's just, is Gary just a bit lazy, maybe?
I'm just built different.
Look, you actually care about our business. You
It's those
actually care about.
feminine traits. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But anyway, speaking of feminine traits, we're going to continue the female series or the woman series, whatever you want to call it. And we're going to continue the discussion on menopause because we've touched on quite a lot. We've touched on training, we've touched on lifestyle, we've touched on nutrition, all of these things that, fit in the realm of what we generally talk about in the health and fitness world, right?
Mm.
There are a few things that we didn't touch on, and we're going to touch on them now. And that is more so related to, I don't know what you would call it, the hormonal support for menopause, right? And we were just talking about this just before the call, naturally enough, as we prepared for this. This is an area that women get some fucking atrocious marketing. You get some like outlandish claims made, and it's understandable in terms of or from a marketing perspective because it's very easy. Like you have someone in front of you that's dealing with these issues that maybe doesn't know why they're going on, why you're having hot flashes, for example, or whatever. You're like, oh, it's just menopause related, but you don't necessarily know the mechanisms behind it. It's so easy to come in and go, oh, you're having a terrible time at things right now. Here's a supplement. Take this, or here's the protocol you should do, or here's the whatever you should do. And it's definitely predatory. But look, that's the world we live in. So hopefully at the end of this episode, you'll be able to look at all these practices and go, yeah, that's probably not great. Now, we're obviously not going to touch on all the different various supplements that you can be taking. If you go back and listen to the like nutrition and lifestyle stuff that we've been talking about with regard to menopause, you'll see that, you know, you're probably better off focusing on that stuff. Like there was a reason we didn't mention a million and one supplements when we're talking about the diet, because they're just not that effective. However, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't consider some things, right? And this is especially true when we're talking about we'll call it hormonal support for menopause. And what we're really talking about there is some sort of hormone replacement therapy, right? And within that, there are varying degrees of, I don't know what you call it, intervention, I suppose, right? There's from the like low level intervention, which we'll talk about because this is where a lot of the marketing goes on, because some of these are like over the counter. So if you're easily able to sell this to people, people are going to try to sell it to people, right? And then you've all the way up to like pharmacological stuff, which some people are hesitant to even think about, especially if they're being told that, oh, there's this quote unquote natural herb or whatever that does the exact same thing, right? So we've a lot to cover in this. Where do we start? Where do we even start with this, Nicola, in terms of where do we think like hormone replacement for menopause? What like why are we replacing hormones? What, like, I know we talked about it before in terms of, okay, the menopause, we're basically getting this like flat line, as we said, of the various hormones. Again, if you haven't listened to the last 2 episodes, I think it was, maybe even 3 episodes, where we've been talking about this, go back and listen to them now. But we're getting this flat line of hormones. So if we just replace those hormones, is that the goal? Like, what's the story here?
Yeah. So I suppose, yeah, the first thing we need to talk about is was the like the definition of the kind of hormonal support and kind of the goal of the hormonal therapy. And I suppose a lot of the language around hormonal support for kind of the menopause is kind of changing. So before, kind of HRT was kind of the main way that we would describe this. But now we know our language changing a little bit, and we're kind of more so saying it's kind of menopausal hormonal therapy. Because the way that we're looking at it now isn't so much that we're trying to kind of replace those hormones, but the goal of it is to kind of treat the symptoms of menopause. And the goal of it, I suppose, is different, whether it is kind of like a premature menopause, so menopause that happens in a woman that's kind of under 40, versus menopause in a woman that might happen kind of, kind of 50, 51 plus. So in that kind of younger category, it's recommended for women to have hormone treatment, and that's to kind of prevent kind of cardiovascular disease, kind of protect bone health, etc. For the kind of women who hit menopause kind of around kind of 50 plus, I suppose the kind of primary indication for hormone therapy is things like the hot flashes, and other kind of symptoms, but predominantly hot flashes is kind of the main one, kind of, and the knock-on effect of kind of sleep disturbance, night sweats, kind of mood, etc. So we know that there's other benefits of hormone therapy. We know that there's a kind of effect on kind of even kind of body composition, kind of skin thickness, etc. But the main indication, I suppose, is the kind of the hot flashes.
Yeah, and I think that's important to understand because that's, first of all, what most people are going to go to their doctor about, right? But it is also important to keep in mind that some of the effects of hormones, right? Again, we've talked about it in the previous episodes, but these hormones, they do baseline effects, they have baseline effects. Like you need them for baseline, living organism, like to its optimal, right? Like even like you mentioned there, like your skin, like there's a difference, or there is a reason why there's a difference in skin quality between, a 25-year-old and a 55-year-old. Now, some of it obviously is like sun damage and different things like that, but just in terms of the quality of the skin, or even hair is an almost better one. It's like estrogen is required for this stuff. Like there's a reason why people say like like a pregnant woman, it's like, oh, like your skin is glowing or whatever. It's like it's hormones that are doing this. So we can look at it from that perspective, because I know a lot of people will look at it from the perspective that they want to maintain some sort of youthful look. They might want to maintain some, like we'll call it, youthful vigor. Like they want to feel like they're optimized. Like there's a lot of talk in the male hormone replacement therapy world of like this, like, oh, I'm going to have like this optimal male hormone replacement therapy. Like I don't necessarily need hormone replacement therapy, but I'm 50 odd now and I want to have the testosterone levels, or maybe even like the growth hormone levels or whatever, like of a 25-year-old man. I want to feel like I'm 25, even though I'm rocking a 60-year-old's body, like, so there's a lot of talk of that. And that also extends into the female hormone replacement therapy world, right? But it is also important to understand that, and this is something that I actually find doctors don't explain well enough themselves, and that is that there are still health effects that are like that are going on behind the scenes, like say heart disease, because heart disease is cumulative. Like you could be whatever, let's say you're a 51-year-old woman, you've no menopausal symptoms, the menopause was a breeze for you, so you never actually went to your doctor to go, oh well, maybe we'll talk about hormone replacement therapy here, because you're like, oh, I didn't really have any like hot flashes, I didn't have any symptoms, right? But that doesn't mean that you are in an optimal health position. Like you're now effectively, like we'll say, missing, quote unquote, missing the beneficial effects of estrogen. And that could have deleterious effects for cardiovascular health down the road, And because it's not like in your face, like hot flashes are, people kind of just brush that under the carpet. But it's also not explained when we're talking about the benefits of like hormone replacement therapy for menopause. It's kind of just like, oh, we're talking about symptom relief. And that is like, obviously, look, that's realistically the name of the game here for the vast majority of this. Like you don't want to have symptoms. You don't want to feel like crap. You don't want to have disturbed sleep. You don't want to have all the different fucking shit things that we were talking about with regard to menopause. But we also want to make sure that you are healthy. We don't want to we don't want like, osteoporosis. We don't want heart disease. And I feel like those things are kind of underplayed, whereas the like hot flashes are kind of not overplayed, but they get the spotlight. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose where that comes into it, from kind of maybe a GP's point of view, would mostly because, kind of with the guidelines, it is kind of the hot flashes and the symptoms are the main indication.
Makes sense. Like
Yeah, yeah,
makes sense. Like that's what people are going
yeah,
to come to you to see,
yeah,
or come to see you about.
absolutely. And then, if like there are side effects, there can be negative aspects of kind of taking kind of HRT. So it's kind of that kind of line where kind of where does you know, where is kind of the line drawn of kind of, you know, prescribing this for someone. But it is something like it is something to consider, you know, particularly kind of doing your own research on and talking to your GP about it, and then kind of coming up between yourselves, is it something that's gonna benefit you. But it's not something that I suppose a GP really is able kind of off the bat, okay, you're coming into menopause, we should think about getting you on HRT. It kind of, you know, has to be, I suppose, nearly a kind of collaboration really kind of between the GP and the patient.
Yeah, and this is one of those things where it's like there basically is no zero risk intervention. Like if you go, oh, I'm not going to go on HRT in any form, like
Yeah.
there are risks associated with that. Whereas if you go on HRT, there's risks associated with that, you know?
Mm.
Or well, we'll talk about some like low level interventions here now in a second. Like there is no zero risk. Like if you do nothing, there's risks. If you do something, there's risks. So you just have to go in informed and go, well, where do I feel comfortable? Like where fits in? And we're not going to be able to answer that in this episode. We might give you some information here, but look, again, I've said it multiple times through this series and multiple times in my life. I'm an idiot, right? Wouldn't be following my advice. Like, yeah, I might go, this is my interpretation of the science, but this is something you're going to have to talk to your doctor about, you know? Like if you joined the team here, like say you wanted to work with someone to help you through this, you wouldn't be talking to me. Like I might have some information and some knowledge about this stuff, but you're going to be talking to Nicola. You know, Nicola is going to be the one that goes, okay, we need to have a conversation. And if like you're not going to be prescribing someone something, so you're going to go, okay, well, let's talk to your doctor about this. You know, so even within us, we're going to refer out, even though like Nicola, you are a doctor, etc. But anyway, right. So we're saying the goal of hormone replacement therapy, right? Because we need to get this clear. We need to make sure that this is very, you know, in front and center when we discuss the rest of this stuff, right? So it's going to be dependent on what population we're talking to. If we're talking to someone that had their, I don't know, their ovaries removed, like the
Yeah.
goal of it is different than if it's just like, I'm the, you know, archetypical, stereotypical, whatever, 51-year-old, I'm going through this menopause. Like there's the goals are going to be different, right?
Yeah.
So keep that in mind. The next thing then is we're really talking about support. We're not talking about like replacement. Like there, it's a subtle change, you know,
Yeah.
it's a subtle change in the words, but it actually does have ramifications, you know? So we're just talking about, okay, there's a certain level of hormones that the body needs that unfortunately right now they're not making, right? And we want to support the body, right? And this is important to understand because as we've talked about in previous episodes, like you could be, you know, only halfway through your life at 51 years old, you know, especially with modern medicine, etc. You know, like, so you could be only halfway through your life. And if we're talking that these hormones have like baseline effects, do you want to go the rest of your life without them? Right. So again, we're talking about support, right? Then we're really talking about reducing symptoms because that is what most people are going to go to their doctor about. So we have to keep that in mind that these hormones or these interventions that we could potentially bring in, they're going to reduce the symptoms that, well, potentially reduce the symptoms that you're experiencing at this time, right? And then on top of that, and this ties in with the support side of things, like we're looking at longevity, right? And we'll call it youthfulness because that's also what people are looking for this stuff for. Like the longevity aspect, it's going to keep you healthier for longer. Ideally, right now, obviously, again, we've talked about it. There's no zero risk intervention. Some of these things, it carries a risk, especially if you certain genetics or whatever. But as we've talked about in previous episodes, like you basically get more of a male health risk after menopause, you know, like your quote unquote female privilege is you don't have to think about heart disease as much as men have to think about heart disease until you hit menopause. And then it's something that you're like, right, now I really have to be on top of this stuff, you know? So if we're talking about preventing heart disease, we obviously have to talk about all the diet, health, lifestyle, etc. stuff, but that also we need to talk about for women at least, we need to talk about there's a hormonal side to this as well, right? So from a longevity perspective, a youth, and obviously there's other disease risks and whatever, we've talked about them in previous episodes. We're not going to touch on absolutely everything here. But also from like a youthfulness, youthful vigor, even the look of youthfulness, there's that aspect as well. So there's multiple goals. That's kind of what we're thinking about when we're talking about hormone replacement therapy, disease risk, etc. All the stuff that we covered, right? So where does someone start with this, right? So they come to you, Nicola. Maybe it's a family member. They're like, oh, Nicola, where should I start with this? Like, I know you have a lot of clients that are in perimenopause or menopause or whatever, and you have to have these discussions about like, what's the first line intervention, or, you know, you kind of have to help people navigate this stuff themselves. And obviously, like, in the hospital and all that kind of stuff. Maybe you have to do that as well. Like, where do we start?
Yeah, so in terms of the hormone replacement therapy, I suppose it's about being kind of, informed. First and foremost is about knowing kind of, what kind of symptoms you're having, how severe they are, kind of, and how it might be kind of impacting your quality of life. And then I suppose, like you were saying, I can talk to my clients about this, but of course I'm not going to be kind of recommending anything, or prescribing anything, because that's not my role as their coach. That is something that you'd want to be, again, linked in with your own kind of doctor about. But definitely, it's something that we can kind of discuss and kind of, again, just help you kind of be more informed about that. But you're looking at kind of symptoms, quality of life, and as well, if that is kind of a route that you want to go down, kind of the hormonal therapy, it's about kind of weighing up that kind of, benefit versus risk. So a lot of the hormonal therapy, that the greatest benefit is kind of seen within kind of the first kind of 10 years of kind of reaching menopause. So kind of really kind of women kind of under 60 that are generally kind of, healthy but kind of symptomatic, that also don't have any, contraindications of kind of hormonal therapies. So that's like, kind of breast cancer, previous history of stroke, coronary heart disease, etc., liver disease. And then after that, you're looking at kind of the different kind of preparations kind of hormonal therapy. So with menopause, are kind of two kind of main hormones, estrogen and progesterone, like we've spoken before, kind of flatlined. And a lot of the symptoms that you might get from menopause, they're kind of associated with that kind of low estrogen state. So the main goal of the hormonal therapy is kind of replacing that estrogen. And so whether you get a preparation kind of with estrogen and progesterone, that depends on whether you have a womb or not. So women that might have kind of had a previous hysterectomy and will just get estrogen, but women that still have a womb will get estrogen and progesterone. And that's because unopposed estrogens, that's kind of estrogen only, will kind of essentially kind of thicken the lining of the womb. And then you can get kind of, endometrial, could increase risk of endometrial cancer from that. So you need that, if you have a womb intact, you need that progesterone to kind of keep that kind of lining of the womb kind of thin, to prevent that. So then you're looking at kind of what different kind of preparations you might get. So for kind of estrogen, you can kind of take an oral tablet. There's like a transdermal kind of like, like a patch or a gel that you can kind of pop on your body. I think that's the kind of preferred kind of method. Because with the tablets, particularly if you have something kind of like liver disease, it means it's not going to be kind of metabolized, in the liver if you kind of have that patch. And as well, it kind of depends on your symptoms as well. So if you're mostly kind of suffering kind of with the genital urinary symptoms, like kind of like vaginal dryness or kind of soreness, maybe you might have kind of an estrogen kind of ring, or you might kind of have like an estrogen gel or something for those symptoms. And then kind of replacing progesterone, again, you can kind of take that orally, or a lot of women will kind of have the Mirena coil, which again just kind of has a coil that's kind of inserted and then will kind of locally kind of excrete progesterone kind of into the womb. Um, and then other thing, again, it completely depends on kind of the woman's symptoms, like kind of testosterone is something else that can be added, particularly for kind of energy levels, libido. But again, that's kind of, it needs to be kind of assessed by your doctor. It's not kind of the usual, but it is something that can be given as well. And that's usually kind of like a gel.
Yeah, 100%. And there's one thing I just wanted to touch on there, because look, we basically said in this, you're going, okay, so there's a few different hormones that we want to potentially support, or like we'll call them like replace, even though we don't like that word, right? Support, right? So there's a few different hormones that we're looking at, but something that you said there that I want to just touch on, because I think it is actually important, especially later on for this discussion, is that this is something that it's really the first 10 years, we'll call it post-menopause, or this kind of like sub 60. Well, if we're saying the average age is 51 or whatever, it's like, it's kind of the first 10 years that seems to get the most benefit of this. And we kind of touched on this before we started this call, but does this mean that this is something that you kind of need to be thinking about now? Let's just say you are a 40-year-old, or even like, I actually think even like, in your 20s, you should be thinking about this stuff, just to have it in your head. It's like, it's one of those things where it's like, oh, you should have an idea of like, if you were to get, I don't know, killed or something, die, do you want to be an organ donor? It's something that's like,
Mm.
you should have that in your mind. I know in organ donors in Ireland, it's a little bit different, but anyway, but it's like something in your mind you should have already thought about. I think it's kind of the same with the menopause, because look, you could literally have to go through menopause at fucking 21, So it's like, this is something that, in my mind at least, you should be thinking about or have an idea of what you would prefer. And obviously that's going to be changed by what your doctor describe or thinks is best for you and all that kind of stuff. But why are we thinking that? Like, why, or first of all, would you agree with that this is something that you should be actually prepared ahead of time for? And then also, like, why can we not just go, oh, look, I went through menopause like 5 years ago, I'll just start, hormone replacement therapy now, or I went through menopause 10 years ago, I'll just start hormone replacement therapy now, like, is that bad? Is that something that we should be against? Like, what's the story there?
So I think, like you were saying, I think it's always important to be informed. Like I think, a lot of women in kind of, in their 20s and their 30s won't have a clue about kind of hormone replacement therapy. They won't have a clue about what the options are. And then it's only kind of when they're having these symptoms that, then they might start kind of, kind of learning about it or talking to other people about it. So it's something that, again, we're kind of not taught in schools, but it's something that I think, is important to have these conversations early, and to know kind of what other kind of symptoms other women are going through, and what's worked for them. Again, being able to talk to your own mother about it, maybe why she went on it or why she didn't, is equally important. And as well, being informed of those contraindications as well. So let's say you might be someone that has, some kind of like liver disease, and then you kind of reach that kind of menopausal age and kind of know that actually maybe I can't go on this, so that's kind of equally as important. Or if there's a history of kind of breast cancer in your family, so I think it's always important to be informed, and it just, again, it opens up these conversations, and makes menopause, and makes kind of hormonal therapy kind of more mainstream and less of a taboo subject. So I think, yeah, definitely it's important to be talking about it, kind of be thinking about it, because it is something eventually that you will have to think about. So kind of why not kind of be informed on it kind of earlier and be able to kind of have conversations with people about it.
Yeah. And I think that is really beneficial, because there's this whole idea of like, oh, I'll just, deal with it as it comes. I'll
Yeah.
deal with the issues as they come, which is fine. Like, obviously, look, that's, humans have been doing that for millennia. We're still here.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I always think it's better to have a plan of action ahead of time. Like, plans, they rarely go to plan. It's like the best laid plans of mice and men, and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
But it is still better to have a plan of action than to have no plan of action. Because if you've no plan of action, then nothing will ever go to plan, because there was no plan.
Mm.
So I think it's better to have an idea in your head at least. But to have an idea in your head, you kind of need to know the pros and cons, right? So we've really only been listing off, oh, well, you might want to support, these different hormones because you have these different symptoms. There's cardiovascular disease risk. We've talked about osteoporosis and osteopenia and all this kind of stuff. We're saying, okay, so, we need hormones for baseline function. We need hormones for XYZ. They're good for this, XYZ, blah, blah, blah. And it kind of paints a little bit of a rosy picture. Now,
Yeah.
obviously, we've caveated that a little bit by saying that, like, if you have some of these counterindications, like, say, for example, you have some sort of estrogen mediated, I don't know, breast cancer, like, it's like you have one, what was that, BRCA2 or whatever, the BRCA gene mutation or whatever. We're like, okay, look, it's estrogen mediated. This is a potential risk for you. Maybe we're not going to go on estrogen therapy,
Yeah.
So we'll take that into account. There are counterindications. You, as an individual, might not be aware of these counterindications, but obviously that would be something that would change your plan of action when you're talking about your doc or talking to your doctor about this stuff, right? So look, that's not necessarily something you need to think about. Obviously, if there's like breast cancer in your family or whatever, it becomes more of a conversation or more of something you could think about. But it's not like you're really going to know that you have like liver disease risk or something. Like, it's unless you know, you know.
Yeah.
But let's assume we've done all that. Are there any negatives here? Right? Why doesn't everyone just go on hormone replacement therapy? Because, and maybe in this you'll talk about that kind of women's health initiative, all the stuff around there, because I know that was a big thing, right? Because we've
Mm.
done studies on this stuff. We've done studies on hormone replacement therapy for women, or menopausal support, whatever we want to call it.
Yeah.
So is it all just rosy? Is it all just good?
Yeah. And so even backpedaling to this kind of ties in question that you were asking, can you take it kind of within 5 years, within kind of 10 years of menopause? So yeah, the indications are kind of within 10 years of reaching menopause. So if it is kind of 5 years post menopause, that's fine. Kind of over 10 years, again, there are some risks involved, and even before that time, there are some risks involved as well. And kind of what highlights this the most is the Women's Health Initiative that was kind of in the early 2000s. So when hormone replacement therapy, or hormonal therapy for menopause came out, it was kind of seen as this kind of panacea, that was going to kind of solve all kind of menopausal issues, was going to kind of, like you're saying, keep youthfulness, etc. And then this study was done, like I said, in the early 2000s, and it kind of came out with saying that actually hormone replacement therapy, there's an increased risk of breast cancer, dementia, cardiovascular disease, and kind of overnight, everyone panicked. People just immediately stopped taking their HRT. Doctors didn't know whether they should be prescribing it or not. Everyone was just, confused and upset. But when they, actually kind of looked into these studies, they were completely flawed. There was a lot of the women that were kind of within the studies were kind of past that kind of 10 years post-menopausal age. They didn't take into account ethnicity. They didn't take into account comorbidities. And so that's why we're seeing a lot of these kind of negative outcomes. And it also kind of wasn't highlighting the fact that kind of short-term, hormone therapy had no associated negative health outcomes either. And so a lot of women kind of, dropped off from using the HRT, and then subsequently you saw, a rise in kind of osteoporosis, you saw a rise in kind of hip fractures, which, obviously has huge kind of morbidity, mortality associated with them as well. So that kind of, study, I suppose, has been kind of debunked since then, but there are still some kind of risks. And this is the kind of the scariest one, I think, that's always kind of brought up, is the breast cancer risk. So about kind of 12 in 1,000 women will get breast cancer in their lifetime. And then on HRT, that risk increases maybe about kind of 3 or 4 per 1,000. So really, it's not a huge increase in risk. I mean, kind of, it goes from, like I was saying, kind of, maybe 12 to kind of, 15, kind of 16 per 1,000. So the kind of the total kind of risk kind of kind of isn't huge, that increase at all. But what's shown with that as well, that there's no there's a lower all-cause mortality of those women that kind of do develop breast cancer as a result from being on HRT. And that's because the women who develop breast cancer because of HRT, it's that kind of hormone sensitive breast cancer, which we know is kind of very well treated. So that's why we don't see that rise in mortality. And then when you look at kind of the increase in breast cancer risk and its kind of totality, the risk is still kind of less than women taking the pill, which is funny, because that's not something that's kind of spoken about. And then things like smoking also increases your risk kind of about the same, kind of about 3 per 1,000. Drinking kind of 2 glasses of wine, so just kind of over your kind of daily kind of units that you should be kind of consuming, it increases by 5 per 1,000. So there's an even greater risk there. And then obesity actually doubles your risk of breast cancer. So when you kind of put it into perspective like that, again, it's kind of weighing up the pros and cons. But if you're someone whose quality of life is completely flatlined by kind of hot flashes, and you're kind of have mood disturbances, sleep disturbances, You know, again, you need to kind of weigh up the pros and cons, but the risk kind of isn't as great as maybe it's made out to be.
Yeah, it seems, at least from my understanding, it seems that if you were to intervene sooner, and like we should kind of explain why that would potentially be the case, is like you have to imagine that, like, again, estrogen has some, baseline effects. Like if you remove that baseline effect, you remove that or that estrogen for long enough, like those cells don't just stay the same. They don't just go, oh, we're expecting X amount of estrogen all the time. We're not getting it. We'll just stay the exact same and hope that in the future we're going to get that. Like no, they changed. They're not stupid. Like your body's not stupid. If you were to then just effectively leave that for long enough, they stop requiring, well, they don't stop requiring it, but they stop expecting that much. And then if you were to just effectively, quote unquote, flood the system with a load of estrogen, like changes have already occurred. Like if you left this 10 years and then flooded the system with estrogen, like changes have occurred. So we have to take that into account. That's effectively why this is very like crappy explanation, but let's just leave it at that. So that's potentially why. But then when we're talking about this like breast cancer risk, like this is something to really keep in mind, that you potentially increase your risk of breast cancer by going on hormone replacement therapy, or any of these, like we're using breast cancer as a like a whatever you want to call it, an example, I suppose, right?
Yeah.
But there are other estrogen mediated cancers and other estrogen mediated whatever that are potentially even increased risk if you do go on hormone replacement therapy. But especially when we're talking about breast cancer, the thing about it is there's clearly a risk associated with going on hormone replacement therapy for breast cancer, but it is those estrogen mediated breast cancers, right? Which seem to be the most easily treated, right? So yeah, you've increased your risk, but you've increased your risk with the cancers that we know, or at least we are better able to deal with, right? So you might get cancer. So if we look at just cancer occurrence outcomes versus if we look at mortality, which is actually what people care about, like no one really cares if they get cancer and it's like, all right, it's easily treated. Like, yeah, obviously it's a harrowing event. Obviously, like it's an emotional roller coaster here, but it's not like you're going to die, right? So that is a risk, but it's not a huge risk, even though we're talking about like whatever 3 to 4 per thousand increase, So that I can't and you can't help someone navigate that, right? That has to be something that you actually sit down and go, well, am I actually okay with that risk? Am I actually okay with the increased risk of getting, breast cancer? And we'll go through some more, maybe potentially, of the risks and benefits of hormone replacement therapy now in a second, just a kind of bullet point or whatever. But you have to sit down and actually go, am I actually okay with that risk? Am I actually okay with that, risk to reward? Because like you're saying, this isn't just like, oh, there's health benefits to going on hormone replacement therapy or whatever. It's also your quality of life. Like imagine, like, and some people do experience this, for 10 years, you have to deal with hot flashes, you have to deal with crappy sleep. You have to deal with being irritable. You have to deal with just feeling like crap because you're going through menopause for effectively 10 years here. Now, again, most people, it's not going to be 10 years of that, but for some people it is, right? So you have to weigh that up. And you also then have to weigh up, and like we were saying before, whether you're going to fucking just pull the plug and do it straight out the gate. You're 51, you're like, menopausal. I talked to my mother, I've talked to women in my family, and they all had a fucking hard time of it. They all had a shit time of it. They went through like, lots of hot flashes, blah, 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 really bad symptoms. Like you kind of have to be ready to pull the plug and just go, I'm going to go on hormone replacement therapy as soon as it's available to me, or you have to be thinking about that in the next couple of years. Once you start going, okay, I'm starting to get some symptoms of this. Do I just go into my doctor, tell them about it, and effectively ask for hormone replacement therapy? In my understanding of all this, the worst outcome is just waiting and waiting and waiting and hoping that, oh, it'll get better, and then coming in at 10 years post menopause and going, okay, now I'll go on hormone replacement therapy. In my mind, at least my understanding, that seems to be the poorest way to handle this. Would you agree with that, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're, I think it's a really Irish thing as well to be like, oh, I don't want to, be taking something, a medication. A lot of people are very kind of resistant towards that, and it is just unfortunate that, like the Women's Health Initiative, like that those studies came out, that even though we now know that they're inaccurate, there is still that kind of resistance of a lot of people, and a lot of people are very skeptical about kind of hormone therapy, which is unfortunate because it has shown a huge improvement in the quality of life of many women, and we also have to put these risks into context. Like if you're 55, normal BMI, doesn't smoke, doesn't drink, no comorbidities, kind of relatively healthy, kind of your risk of, breast cancer, or other risks, which we'll go through, is going to look very different again to someone who is maybe not even a smoker, but maybe a bit of a drinker, kind of overweight. Like it's going to look completely different, that risk as well. So it just has to take everything into context. And as well, even things like if you've had children or not. So women that have had children, again, have a lower risk of breast cancer in general. So there's a lot of these things that have to be taken into account.
Yeah, and I actually don't even think an individual themselves could weigh up all the risks and,
No, absolutely not.
like it is something that you're just going to have to do a lot of your own research on. Like obviously, like this episode is supposed to give you some sort of idea, supposed to give you some like starting points for this stuff. But I genuinely don't think you can find all the answers. I don't think any individual, even if you were the top of the fucking food chain scientist in this stuff, like I don't think you can actually accurately weigh up all the risks from a purely like scientific point of view. You have to bring in the okay, I don't know what you would call it, the like life stuff, whatever else you have going on in your life. You're like, are these symptoms, are the benefits of hormone replacement therapy good for you, your life situation, all that you have going on. And then ideally, you would also talk to your doctor and they would give you rationale for like, oh, well, I've seen thousands of other women that have gone through similar things. And this seems to be what's most effective, in your community, because you would presume your community or whatever is somewhat representative of, you in general, so benefits and risks of hormone replacement therapy. Give me the quick hitter here. Give me the why would someone do it and why would someone not do it? Because I want to just kind of neatly kind of wrap this up into this, because then there's some other things that we need to talk about in terms of we'll talk about them in a second. But let's just give me the quick hitter. First of all, there's a variety of different forms of hormone replacement therapy. It's not like we're just talking about a singular, oh, this is the one protocol that we have. Like
Yeah.
protocols are different, the methods of delivery are different. We'll assume that. But why would someone, assuming they're talking to their doctor, they come to their doctor, they have symptoms, their doctor goes, oh, hormone replacement therapy. What would you say to someone? You're helping someone decide here, whether you're like, right, these are the benefits, these are the risks.
Yeah, so I suppose the main benefits are the symptom control. So you're talking about like your hot flashes, kind of sleep disturbances, and even kind of mood disturbances, kind of decreasing the risk of like osteoporosis for a lot of women, and your cardiovascular disease risk as well. Those are kind of the main ones. And then you have, I suppose, I don't want to say kind of more like superficial benefits, but kind of a lot of women will find that there's kind of they'll kind of be keeping their kind of skin quality, kind of their hair won't be kind of as brittle, and then kind of body composition as well. But again, those aren't necessarily reasons why you go on it, but women kind of do find a difference in those.
100%. And then what are the risks?
And then the risk, so like you're saying, that kind of increase in breast cancer. There's also an increase in kind of I suppose the risk of kind of blood clots. But again, this is like a small risk, and the risk is kind of lessened kind of with the transdermal patch that we are talking about. But there is still a slight risk. Like I said, it's still not as high as kind of being on the pill. But yeah, that's a risk as well. So then a knock on effect of like a risk of stroke. There's a risk of kind of getting endometrial cancer, but that's only if you're only on kind of the estrogen only. Those are kind of the main ones.
Perfect. Right. So go away from it. You can listen to all that. You can go, right, there's some main risks, there's some bullet points of the risks and the pros, the cons. We can't make the decision for you. Unfortunately, this is something you need to talk to your doctor about, right? But there is something that your doctor might actually talk about before they even suggest hormone replacement therapy, right? And this is, potentially might suggest some sort of antidepressant, and you could be a woman that goes to your doctor and goes, I feel like crap, I'm having these like hot flashes and my sleep is crap. They might say, oh, well, here's an antidepressant, is that something that they would do?
Yeah, so that this is like a really controversial topic that a lot of women are saying, they kind of went to their doctor and they're experiencing these symptoms and they're put on an antidepressant, which kind of by and large, kind of putting, all women that are kind of perimenopause on an antidepressant isn't right. I think that's fairly obvious. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean that that there will be, no benefit to either, or that that's completely inappropriate kind of, for you. Again, if you're someone who can't take hormonal therapy for whatever reason, maybe like a kind of a low dose kind of SSRI might be kind of an appropriate intervention for you. Maybe you want to try kind of other interventions first, kind of like CBT. Maybe you want to try kind of hormonal therapy first as well. And again, that's going to be completely individual, but definitely, kind of putting all women that are perimenopausal on kind of, an antidepressant isn't the right thing to do. But again, it depends on what kind of symptoms that you're experiencing. So.
Yeah, and this is a hard one because you can understand why someone would suggest, oh, here's an antidepressant, right? Like if you come to someone and you're saying, basically, I feel like crap. Like again, these hormones, as we talked about, are required for baseline functioning, and that in turn is about like cognitive functioning. Like this is what people will say, like, oh, when I'm perimenopause or menopause, I forget things, or words don't come to me as quickly as they used to, and I can't hold the same train of thought that I had. And like they'll say stuff like, and that's cognitively related. But also we have mood disturbances. And some of this is related to, lack of sleep or interrupted sleep and stuff like that. But also, again, hormones are related to your mood. And everybody knows this in this day and age. It's like, okay, like we know, for example, like testosterone, if you have someone that has low testosterone as a man, for example, you'd be like, right, you'd probably expect that they're a little bit depressed. Like testosterone is required for this kind of like, drive and, whatever, masculine energy, whatever you want to call it, right? So it's like, yeah, okay, they're going to be depressed. And this is the same with women. Like you need these baseline hormones to make you feel like you've always felt like, So you can understand why someone would suggest going, okay, you feel like crap, you're depressed, you've gone through menopause, or you're going through menopause, or you're perimenopause, we'll put you on some sort of antidepressant so that you can overcome the depression. It's like, it doesn't mean that we're going to be on this for the rest of your life, but right now it's going to give you that little, we'll call it a pick me up. That's not how antidepressants work, but we'll say it's kind of like a pick me up. So it brings you to this higher baseline so you don't feel as depressed. Cool. That allows you to go through the symptoms, etc., deal with your life. Yeah. But it's kind of one of those things where it's like, this is downstream of the actual issue. The actual issue is the lack of these hormones, right? Mm-hmm. So would we be better off not just supporting the hormones or supporting the need for these hormones rather than going, here's an antidepressant, I would think so. But like you said, there is clearly a conversation to be had here in terms of some people are not able to go on, hormonal support. Some people, like, again, you could have like, again, in your family, you've got some sort of estrogen mediated cancer risk, right? You're going to go, well, I can't go on hormonal support now. Do I just have to fucking grin and bear it?
Yeah.
So for them, we can go, okay, we have these other options. And there's actually other options as well, which we'll talk on as well. But as a blanket statement, like you were even saying just before, like, Up to Date is a website that like doctors and stuff use to be like, what's the most up-to-date research? What's the most up-to-date literature? Hence the name Up to Date, right? And even on that, you were saying that this is one of those kind of frontline interventions. So
yeah,
I don't know. I don't necessarily agree with that, but where do we go from there?
Yeah, exactly. So it depends on the person, the situation, if they're able to take, hormonal therapy, and women might be described prescribed hormonal therapy, and an SSRI. So it's completely dependent. Like, I think obviously, I think everyone would agree, kind of painting all perimenopausal women with the same brush, and putting them on, an SSRI and antidepressant is the wrong thing to do. But it doesn't necessarily mean that, it might be the wrong thing for you as an individual. It might be a good alternative.
Yeah,
And
100%.
it just depends.
Yeah. Now, on top of that, there are potentially other things that we might layer on, and we're talking about a hormonal therapy discussion. So maybe we'll talk about, there are a few other hormones that potentially your doctor might talk about. And this is more so like we're covering these because if you search online, you'll see these, people will say, oh, this thing, especially if you uh, read message boards or whatever that Americans are on, because there's a lot of clinics over in America. Well, there's around the world. I won't just paint the fucking brush with just America, but there's a lot more money to be made, let's say, in American healthcare than other places in the world. But your doctor might prescribe growth hormone, right? They might go, oh, growth hormone is something, it goes down. Levels of growth hormone in your body go down with regard to, or when you get older, I should literally just say, when you get older, your levels of growth hormone go down. And so your doctor might go, well, this is a youthful hormone or youthfulness hormone. So we might start supplementing with this in, menopause, or even earlier. A lot of people will say this. In my understanding, well, first of all, I actually don't think growth hormone is associated with youthfulness. I don't think that's a statement that is actually supported by the literature. But also, I think it actually increases your risk of different cancers and stuff disproportionate to the benefit that you would potentially get from it. It's not like it's actually going to help you a huge amount. That's my interpretation of the science. And in my mind as well, you'd actually just be better off getting good sleep and exercising, So I don't know what your thoughts are there, Nicola, in terms of growth hormone. Is that something that if you were to go to your doctor right now, like your GP or whatever, and maybe even like a dedicated hormone clinic? I know there's a lot of more of those these days than there would have potentially been 10, 20 years ago. They might suggest growth hormone, especially if you go into like, what are the Hollywood A-listers doing? You'll see a lot of them are on like growth hormone, and it does have benefits, don't get me wrong. Like, obviously, it has benefits in terms of skin quality and different things or whatever. But is it something that the average person should be thinking about? Is it something that your doctor is even going to bring up?
Yeah, I'd agree with you. I don't think it's not something that I kind of put to the forefront. And I think kind of the biggest kind of issue with that, and a lot of other kind of supplements, is that we're all kind of looking for kind of the one that works, kind of the secret one that works. But for, by and large, for the majority of people, that's probably not going to be as helpful as other things, like you were saying, sleep and exercise.
Yeah. So if you see people going, oh, growth hormone for menopause, yeah, like it might offer some benefit for some individuals from a quote unquote youthfulness perspective, because that's what it's basically marketed as. But in my mind, look, it's not something that I would be putting a lot of time and thought into. However, we just mentioned that, oh, it would be great if we could just get some good sleep and good exercise. Now, obviously, look, we have a vested interest in suggesting exercise. We are proponents of exercise, but sleep, if you're having hot flashes, you're having all these different things, that maybe are potentially preventing you from having good sleep, is melatonin something that we should potentially be thinking about, right? Because melatonin, unless if you're unaware of it, melatonin is effectively, we'll call it the sleep hormone. It's something that helps you regulate your sleep-wake cycle. We'll say it is itself regulated by the diurnal rhythm, the circadian rhythm, the diurnal rhythm of the day, basically, and that influences your circadian rhythm. So what I mean by that is, like, it is suppressed by blue light, right? So melatonin secretion is suppressed by blue light. So that would be ideal during the day. You're out and about, the sun is shining, cool. You don't want to be secreting, we'll call it this sleep hormone, right? But then when the sun goes down, red light out, and we get some melatonin secretion. However, if we're having hot flashes, body temperature also plays a role in your circadian rhythm, your ability to sleep, all that kind of stuff. We might be in a situation where you can't get to sleep. You might have a lack of melatonin, or a lower amount of melatonin, or it's not a sufficient amount of melatonin. We also know that melatonin is associated, or it is correlated, I should say, with, we'll call it hormonal things, right? Because you can give melatonin to, say, for example, prepubescent or just on the cusp of puberty. You can give melatonin to, well, I don't think it's been done in humans, but you can do it to rats and stuff, right? You can give it to them and it will effectively delay puberty, right? So we know there is some association here, some sort of mechanism is occurring that's, interacting with these two systems. Is melatonin something that we should be thinking about?
So, possibly, and again, feel like I keep saying, it depends on the woman, but it really does depend on the woman. If someone is experiencing kind of sleep disturbances, and maybe that we know how linked in, mood and sleep are, so it could be something, to consider, like if you're having, those kind of symptoms, if you are having trouble sleeping, again, it's something I know in some countries you can get it over the counter. In Ireland, it has to be prescribed, so it would have to be something that you'd have to talk to your GP about. But
It's very strange because like we all live in the European Union, and in half the European Union countries, like, well, we don't all live. I actually literally right now don't live in the European Union, so I don't know why I said that. But anyway,
yeah.
in some European Union countries, it's literally just over the counter. So you could just go on holidays and take this stuff. Now, I don't know what the story is with, border security and all that kind of stuff. I'm not a legal expert, so don't go
Yeah.
to fucking France or something, get a lot of melatonin. But it is a weird one, because it's like
Yeah,
it's over the counter.
I think it can be taken off you if you order it in. I think it can be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's one of those weird ones where
Yeah.
it is technically a hormone here, right? But you can,
Yeah.
in some countries, you can order it over the counter, or so you can just get it over the counter. And in some countries, it's banned. So we're having this discussion, but we're having this discussion as like a meta discussion. I think, again, like you said, like you can get it prescribed by your doctor in Ireland. But I just want to, clear our name in this, or be like, look, you have to do wherever you're listening to this, because I know literally thousands of people listen to this around the world. So I'm like, look, you have to do your own due diligence here and, see what the legal aspect of this is.
Yeah, so I suppose it's mostly going to help with kind of the onset of sleep, but my big thing would be, if you're not sleeping because of, really intense, like night sweats, kind of is melatonin kind of the right thing for you to go on, or should you kind of be looking down, other routes, kind of, like hormonal therapy routes, that might be kind of, more effective? Is melatonin just kind of putting, kind of, a band-aid on the issue, or is that something that's going to help? And again, maybe you're someone that doesn't want to take, hormonal therapy or can't, maybe you're not kind of in that bracket, and it just depends. But that is something else to think about. Am I just kind of, kind of polypharmacy, just taking something to kind of stop symptom of something else,
Which is tempting to do, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
It's tempting to be like, oh, well, I'll take this thing for this thing and I'll take this other thing for this.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that that's the best approach. However, again, look, you're gonna have to talk to your doctor. There is a few things about melatonin, like it does seem to be like linked to the onset of perimenopause, melatonin levels. Now, that's what I'm talking about in like a free living individual. Like if you're just to measure melatonin levels, and then when do these people hit perimenopause? There does seem to be a link here, right? In terms of, I think it's low levels are associated with earlier like perimenopause. But that could also be a sleep thing, because if you have low levels of melatonin, it's like, you're not getting enough sleep, and maybe that has links in terms of like your body's ability to whatever. Like there's so many different things going on there. But supplementing can actually delay menopause, right? That's according to some studies. Right now, I wouldn't go out and go like, oh, I've stumbled upon this like absolute secret. Like I wouldn't hold my hat, or I wouldn't pin my hat on this and go like, these are the best, highest quality studies. It's so robust. We have millions of participants. Like, not at all, right? But there does seem to be something here, right? However, if we're talking about a practical, like, what do we do as an individual here? What do we do? Tie this stuff all together. Like, it doesn't seem to be a huge benefit, Like if it's over the counter in your country and you're like, you know what, maybe I'll try this. It's, a fucking couple of quid here, Now, a lot of the time you'll find these like mega dosed ones, like you literally need such a small dose. Like it's like 0.3 milligrams or something like that. Is it micrograms, or I think it's milligrams anyway, it's like very small, and you'll see these products with like 10 milligrams, and it's like you just don't need that much. So like a very small dose it can improve sleep. So, well, for some individuals, like we said, it depends. So that's something to potentially consider. But again, it's not going to be this panacea. It's not going to be this cure all. You might see some improvements in mood. You might see some, there's some studies that suggest that there's a mitigation of depressive symptoms. So again, if you're in this position where you're like, look, I've tried this, I've tried these other higher level interventions, they're not giving me the symptom relief that I want, maybe then it's something to look at, but it wouldn't be a first line intervention, at least in my estimation of the research, but there are other things. Right? So we're talking about, right, we've got this like quote unquote best, right? Obviously, again, that's like a value judgment, and that's something that an individual has to do. But we'll say quote unquote best from a population wide. We're going to talk about hormone replacement therapy. That's the thing. Pharmacological hormone replacement therapy. That's what your doctor is going to recommend. That's what seems to be the most beneficial. Then we've got maybe some other hormones related to that. We've got growth hormone, we've got melatonin. You're like, maybe there's potential benefit, right? But there are also low level interventions that are more, we'll call them over the counter, and maybe something that if you're really, because the reason we're covering these is because I know a lot of people are against taking hormones, or they're against like, oh, I don't want to have to pay for a drug, or I don't want to have to do whatever. But that doesn't mean that it falls into this kind of naturalistic fallacy of like, oh, well, I'll take something natural that is found in nature.
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't mean that it's good. Like cancer is natural, it's found in nature. The AIDS virus is natural. It's like, it doesn't mean that it's good, right? So don't fall into that naturalistic fallacy or the naturalistic trap. But I know a lot of people, they do have something against pharmacological interventions. So what can those people think about?
Yeah, so the big one I suppose that you hear a lot about is phytoestrogens. So phytoestrogens, they're natural compounds kind of mostly found in plant-based foods. So they're thought to kind of mimic the effects of estrogen in the body. So there's a lot of kind of but buzz around phytoestrogen. So they'll be mostly seen kind of soybeans, soy-based products, chickpeas, flax seeds, etc. So it, like I said, it's thought to kind of mimic the way kind of estrogen acts in the body. So it's thought to kind of reduce kind of hot flashes, etc. But the research is kind of sketchy on it. I mean, like what quantity of kind of, soybeans, soy-based products, should you kind of be consuming for this? And then kind of what level is this going to reduce kind of the hot flashes by? That's kind of the main thing. There's also, supplements. So red clover supplements, kind of a soy isoflavone supplement, which is like a more concentrated form of this. And there is shown to be kind of like, a greater benefit kind of with them. But again, you're really kind of, need to look at kind of the severity of the symptoms and whether this is something that kind of would benefit you. And even a lot of the studies are quite sketchy, some showing, great benefit, other when compared to a placebo are showing kind of, the same benefit as taking supplement versus not. So it's kind of one of those things that's really hard to know. It's not something that I'd kind of like immediately like recommend, but it's not something that I'd tell someone, not to have, unless you're not supposed to have them if you have a history of like breast cancer.
Like the same things apply in terms of like if you have an estrogen mediated risk factor.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's likely not going to be kind of, harmful for you to consume. It's definitely not going to be harmful for you to consume kind of more soybeans, or even kind of take a supplement. But again, if you're buying a supplement, obviously there's a money factor with that as well.
Yeah, and also a predatory marketing factor with that, with that as well. People go, oh, like this supplement has shown huge benefits or whatever, and then if you actually look at the data, it's like, oh, this is just in like a cell culture. It seems to have some sort of estrogenic effect. There's no actual like, oh, it reduced symptoms and it did like anything in the actual real world, or it's like, oh, it seemed to do it in rats. It's like, I don't know if you've ever asked a rat if they have hot flashes. Like, they're not going to be able to tell you.
Exactly.
So it's like, in my mind, like plant estrogens or phytoestrogens, like it's a low level intervention. It's something that, again, if you're just really against trying, like actually going to your doctor and getting prescribed like some sort of estrogen or whatever, like it's potentially something there, you know. But this is such a low, like small amount of estrogen that it's kind of like, is it really all that beneficial, right? Is it really doing much of anything? Now, estrogen is quite potent. You know, you only need a small amount to get the job done, but it wouldn't be something that I'd be like, oh no, I eat soybeans like or tofu or whatever a couple of times per week, and that means I get enough estrogen. No, like it's not it's not it's not that good, you know. And this is actually, it's kind of interesting because like people often forget that like plants do, they're living things, you know, like they have to communicate, they have to have like quote unquote hormones here. Like we often forget that, like the stuff where people forget that, like say you get a testosterone, like a lot of people will get like testosterone, whether they're, you know, bodybuilders supplementing with testosterone, or you know it's, you know, legally prescribed hormone replacement therapy, testosterone. Like a lot of that is made from yams, you know, it's like the actual like cholesterol, if you will, like the kind of backbone. It's just, they're basically just made from yam,
Yeah.
we'll call it cholesterol, and then it's made into testosterone. You know, it's kind of the same for estrogens and stuff like that. So it makes sense, you know, that if we had a sufficient quantity of this, or if we chose foods that had a sufficient amount of this already in them, like this compound that kind of looks like estrogen, that seems to bind to the estrogen receptor, and you get some sort of estrogen signaling, happy days, you know.
Mm.
But there's so many drugs that we could use that would just do that so much better, you know.
Yeah.
Notably, we could actually just supplement with estrogen itself, or one of the estrogens itself, you know. So it's like, in my mind, look, I'm not going to be bigging up plant estrogens. There's something that, you know, maybe you would consider, you know. It's like, all right, look, I don't want to do, you know, pharmacology. I don't want to get into any of this like big pharma or whatever, you whatever ethical, moral, fucking, I don't know, whatever your beef is with pharmacological interventions. You're just like, I don't want to do that. Then the only other hormonal intervention you potentially have here is some sort of phytoestrogen, some sort of plant estrogen. And it seems to be that soy isoflavones and red clover supplements, they seem to be the ones that are most supported, but it's very weak evidence, at least in my mind, at least, you know.
Yeah.
And there are other things, unless you've anything else to say on plant estrogens.
No, no, I think that
Yeah, there are other things, like you'll often see like DHEA said, oh, like, you know, you go through menopause, take some DHEA, and you know you can make a mechanistic, you know, rationale for why that would be potentially helpful here. You know, we can say that DHEA is, we could actually even call it one of the main androgens, so one of the main, like we'll call them male, if you want to use that terminology, hormones for women. So you can be like, all right, if you want to have increases in mood, you want to have some sort of testosterone support for women, like DHEA, you know, maybe it has some benefit here. Now, it also does other things because you can actually get like some aromatase activity. So you can get some increase in estrogen by virtue of increasing testosterone, which then gets converted to estrogen. So there are potential benefits here from an estrogen perspective, because that's the main thing we're thinking about when we're thinking about menopause. But I don't think it's really well supported. You know, a lot of, you'll see this on the message boards, be like, oh, take some DHEA, and you
mm,
might get some symptom relief. You might get some sort of benefit. Like a lot of people will go on the pill, for example. You'll see this on message boards as well. Some people do recommend it. They'll go on the pill. They'll notice that their strength goes down. They're strength athletes or whatever, and then they start taking DHEA, so they get some sort of, you know, testosterone signaling, because, you know, some of the pills or whatever have anti-androgenic effects, which is why, as we've talked about in like PCOS and whatever, like it's beneficial for them. But for some
yeah.
individuals, they might be like, oh, like I'm losing out on some of the benefits that I had from being, like, you know, quote unquote natural. I wasn't on the pill, you know. So they might take DHEA and go, oh, look, this is actually a huge benefit here. I feel more vigor, I feel strength in the gym, whatever. Again, it's just like masculine hormone or whatever. You're getting these kind of
Yeah.
like stereotypical masculine effects. So we can see how that could potentially be beneficial in menopause, but I just don't see a huge amount of evidence to be like, this is where I'm going to lay my hat. This is much better than anything else that we could potentially do. You know, like it's there. It's something that, you know, maybe you can consider, but for the vast majority of people, I just
Yeah.
wouldn't even consider it. You know, it's
Yeah.
also, again, similar to melatonin. It's illegal. over the counter in a lot of countries, you know? So it's one of those things where you're like, all right, you actually have to now think about the legal whatever obligations or whatever you want to call them about, you know, potentially getting this supplement, you know? So unless you have anything else to say for that, it's not something that I would be recommending.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. But there are other things. Black cohosh. I don't know how to really say
Yeah.
it, but I think it's cohosh. You see that often recommended. What's the story there?
So it's a herb, and it's thought to, increase the effects of estrogen. But just like a lot of other things, there's the when you look into the evidence again, it's very sketchy. Like there's a lot of studies showing kind of great benefit for this, particularly in terms of kind of hot flashes. But then again, when compared with placebo, it may not show kind of much of a benefit. And again, it's one of those things that again, I wouldn't necessarily like recommend it to a client if they're already on it. It's likely not going to do kind of any kind of damage. And even if there is a placebo benefit, that might be good for some women. But again, like you're paying for it for something that might not actually be really benefiting you. Again, so it might not be negative, but it's not necessarily something that I would say, do this, try this.
Yeah. And then there are a whole host of other supplements that have fantastic marketing, but are generally not really that effective. You know, they might have, again, some data to support them, but it's not like robust. Like, oh,
Yeah.
this is the next big thing, you know? Like if you read their marketing literature, you're like, Jesus, this sounds fucking phenomenal. This sounds great.
Yeah.
But they have worded that in such a way to maximize the appeal of it, but that doesn't mean that it's very scientific, you know?
Yeah.
And obviously, look, we haven't fucking done a deep dive on every single potential supplement for menopause. I'm sure there's fucking millions out there that maybe, maybe one of them has a benefit. And that's the thing that gets you hooked.
Yeah.
You're like, one of these actually, it's the secret. It's actually the one thing that nobody else knows, and it's fantastic, you know? But like I wouldn't be spending all your money on various supplements when there's so much more effective interventions out there, you know? Do you mind
Yeah.
say on supplements?
Yeah, I suppose the thing is with marketing is that it targets people that are vulnerable. So if you have a product that's, targeted towards kind of relieving kind of menopause symptoms, it's hard, if you're someone that is struggling kind of with the perimenopause, not to feed into that. So it is kind of if like talking to someone, kind of being informed, kind of like, do I need this? Kind of what are like the benefits that they're kind of putting out. Do I need these things? Like I was saying last week, a client that joined with me was on one of these supplements for the menopause, and had phytoestrogens in it, which she's not someone that suffers kind of with hot flashes. Her symptoms are completely different towards the tutored benefits of phytoestrogens. And then there was omega-3s on it, and it was saying kind of for your cardiovascular health. And then when you look into it, the quantity, I think it was like like 240 milligrams a day, kind of total of kind of your EPA and your DHA. And I was like, that's crap. So like it's kind of just looking at that, like, do I need this, and is this actually kind of the most beneficial kind of thing that I could be taking?
Yeah, but it sounds great. You're like, you're
Sounds great. Yeah, I'm like cardiovascular benefits, and then when you look at it, you're like, oh,
yeah. Um, so supplements were generally not, we're not enthusiastic about them, right? But let's wrap this non-hormone replacement therapy stuff up, right? So what works? What doesn't?
Yeah, so like you're saying, nutrition and exercise, kind of it works. It's safe, and effective. Kind of nutrition, exercise, things like reducing caffeine, reducing alcohol, not smoking, and then again, vaginal lubricants can be beneficial again if you're suffering with kind of genital urinary symptoms. And then things that kind of and HRT, as well, obviously. And then in terms of kind of things that we don't know, so like we were saying, like the DHEA, the phytoestrogens, the black cohosh, etc. Acupuncture, we just don't know how effective that they really are, and they might in years to come we might kind of turn around and have to go back on that and said actually phytoestrogens are incredible, but right now we just kind of don't have the data on that to say for sure.
100%. So yeah, that's most of everything I think we want to cover. Is there anything else that you want to wrap up on or touch on again?
No, I think that's all good.
Fantastic. So yeah, look, guys, you know where to find us. I'm not going to do the big spiel here now. All our links and stuff are below or above, depending on where you listen to this. If you enjoyed this series, like share it with your friend. That really does help. Like I know everyone and their grandmother says stuff like that when you listen to any like podcast or whatever, say, oh, share with your friend. But that kind of stuff actually really does help get our podcast out, get the message out, etc. Leave a 5-star review. If you've nothing good to say, don't say anything at all. Just don't review us. 5-star reviews only. But yeah, if you can leave a review on whatever podcasting app you listen to, like that's obviously much appreciated, and it is beneficial and helpful for our company, etc. Nicola, you do have some spaces available for some clients. So if people are looking, for help, whatever it is, whatever female issue it is, you're there. You also do consults. If someone's like, look, I know you can't prescribe this, or I know you can't tell me what to do, but I just need someone that's somewhat educated in this stuff to help me make better decisions. Like you can be there to help them to make sure they're doing like, okay, have you got your nutrition dialed in? Have you got your training dialed in? Have you got your lifestyle dialed in? Oh, you want to know about this? This is something that you shouldn't be thinking about until you've done X, Y, and Z. So if you want, you can book in with Nicola, get a consultation in. So I have nothing else really to say. Do you have anything else to say?
No, all good.
Other than that, follow us on social media, subscribe to the podcast, do all that good stuff, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, and we'll see you in the next one.